There is a specific kind of person who sits in a room full of people and still feels like they are the only one truly awake. Not better, not worse, just different. Like they are watching a movie everyone else is living inside of. And no matter how many times they try to step through the screen, something pulls them back to the quiet, back to themselves. Back to a kind of solitude that the world has spent years telling them is a problem to fix. This video is not for everyone. If you have a packed social calendar, a group chat that never stops, and weekends that are always full, this probably won't land the way it's meant to. But if you have ever sat with your phone in your hand, scrolled through a list of names, and felt genuinely nothing, not sadness, not longing, just a quiet recognition that no one on that list quite reaches you, then keep watching. Because what you are about to hear might be the first honest explanation you have ever received for something you have been quietly carrying for years. Most people assume that having few friends means something went wrong, that somewhere along the way you failed a social test everyone else seemed to pass without studying. You were too sensitive, too intense, too much, or somehow not enough. The world handed you a measuring stick that counted friendships like achievements, and by that measure, you kept coming up short. And the worst part was not the loneliness. The worst part was the story you started telling yourself about what the loneliness meant. But here is what no one tells you. There is a specific psychological profile, rare, precise, and deeply misunderstood, that almost always ends up with fewer friends, not because of failure, not because of fear, but because of how they are fundamentally wired to experience other human beings. And once you understand that wiring, everything changes. Not just how you see your social life, but how you see yourself. Empaths feel the world in a register most people never access. When someone walks into the room carrying grief they haven't spoken out loud yet, the empath feels it before a word is exchanged. When a conversation shifts from genuine to performed, the speaker's tone becomes more insincere. The empath notices the exact moment it turns, not intellectually but physically, like a pressure change in the air. This is not a metaphor. Research in social neuroscience has consistently shown that highly sensitive individuals process emotional stimuli more deeply, more thoroughly, and through more areas of the brain than the average person. They are not imagining what they feel. They are receiving more signal than everyone else in the room. Now, think about what that means in a social context. Every interaction, every conversation, every gathering, every relationship is not just an exchange of words and time. For an empath, it is an immersive experience. You are not just talking to someone. You are absorbing their emotional state, processing their unspoken needs, regulating the energy of the space, and managing your own internal experience all at the same time. And then you go home and you are exhausted in a way that sleep does not fully fix. This is the first thing people get wrong about empaths with few friends. They assume the small circle is a result of something missing, a deficit of social skill, a wound that never healed, a fear of intimacy dressed up as preference. But pull back the lens and a completely different picture emerges. The small circle is not a failure of connection. It is the result of an extraordinarily high standard for what connection actually means. You have sat in conversations that felt like performances. You have been in friendships that required you to edit yourself before every interaction to sand down the parts that were too honest, too deep, too direct, too much. You'd have smiled at the right moments, laughed at the right jokes, shown up when it was expected, and driven home afterward feeling more alone than if you had stayed in by yourself. And at some point, quietly, without announcement, you stopped. But not dramatically, not with confrontation or closure. You just stopped showing up because you finally understood something that most people spend their whole lives avoiding. The loneliness of being misunderstood while surrounded by people is far heavier than the loneliness of simply being alone. That is not isolation. That is discernment. And the difference between those two things is everything. Here is the contrast no one draws clearly enough. Isolation is fear wearing the mask of preference. It is retreating because the world feels threatening, because vulnerability feels dangerous, because connection carries a risk you are not willing to take. Isolation shrinks you. It cuts you off from things you actually want. It is avoidance in a quiet room, and somewhere underneath it there is ache. Discernment is different. Discernment is choosing based on what you know about yourself, about what genuine connection costs you, about what you are willing to give and what you are not. Discernment does not ache in the same way. It has a kind of clarity to it, a steadiness. You are not running from connection. You are refusing to settle for its counterfeit. And that refusal, that precise, uncompromising refusal, is what leaves an empath with a very small, very quiet, very honest social world. The question is not why empaths end up with few friends. The question is why we have spent so long treating that outcome as a symptom instead of a signal. Because here's the thing about signals. They carry information. And the information this one carries once you learn to read it clearly. Do S not point towards something broken? It points towards something rare. Something that most people will spend their entire lives searching for in crowded rooms and never find a relationship with their own inner world that is so complete, so honest, so fully inhabited that external noise starts to feel like interference rather than comfort. You are not someone who failed at friendship. You're someone who cannot fake it. And in a world built almost entirely on social performance, that is not a small thing. That is not a flaw to correct. That is a compass. And the rest of this video is going to show you exactly what it is pointing toward. There is a moment that most empaths can pinpoint even if they have never put words to it before. It does not happen all at once. It happens gradually across years, across rooms, across conversations that started with promise and ended with that familiar hollow feeling in the chest. The moment is this. You realize that being around people does not automatically mean you are less alone. And once you realize that, you cannot unrealize it. It rewires something. It changes the way you move through social spaces, the way you evaluate relationships, the way you decide where your energy goes and where it does not. Most people never have this realization because most people never feel the difference sharply enough. For an empath, the difference is not subtle. It is the gap between breathing freely and breathing through a mask. And once you have felt that gap, you will spend the rest of your life refusing to go back. This is where the story of the empath with few friends actually begins. Not in childhood shyness, not in social rejection, not in some wound that never healed. It begins in perception. In the fact that empaths perceive social reality at a resolution that most people simply do not have access to. Think of it this way. Most people move through a social interaction the way someone walks through a room with the lights on at half brightness. They see the furniture. They navigate successfully. They leave without bumping into anything. But an empath walks into the same room with every light blazing at full intensity. They see the furniture, yes, but they also see the dust on the shelves, the crack in the ceiling, the way the window frame is slightly warped, the coffee ring on the table that someone wiped at but did not quite clean. They see everything. And seeing everything is not a gift wrapped in comfort. It is a gift wrapped in exhaustion. Because here is what seeing everything actually means in a friendship. It means you notice when someone's words and their energy do not match. When they say they are fine, but their whole body is braced against something. When they laugh a little too quickly or go quiet a half second too long or use a tone that is technically cheerful but carries something heavier underneath. You notice all of it. And noticing all of it means you are never fully off duty in a social setting. You're always reading, always processing, always tracking the invisible current beneath the visible surface. And that level of sustained attention, that constant emotional labor is something most people never even know is happening, let alone appreciate or reciprocate. This is one of the loneliest aspects of being an empath that almost never gets named directly. You give a quality of attention to other people that most of them have never received in their lives. You see them in a way that their oldest friends, their partners, their family members often do not, and they feel it. That is why strangers open up to you in waiting rooms. That is why people you barely know end up telling you things they have never told anyone. That is why people describe being around you as different, calmer, safer, more real. You create a quality of presence that is genuinely rare. But very few people can meet you at that level in return. Very few people will notice what you are carrying. Very few people will track your shifts the way you track theirs. And over time, that asymmetry, giving deep attention and receiving surface level responses, becomes a weight that is very hard to keep carrying inside relationships you are supposed to find comforting. So you start to let some of those relationships breathe themselves out. Not with anger, not with confrontation. You just stop pouring energy into spaces where nothing grows, and the circle gets smaller. And the outside world looks at that smaller circle and draws the wrong conclusion entirely. The wrong conclusion is this, that you are closed off, that you are difficult, that you set the bar too high, expect too much, give too little, or somewhere deep down are simply afraid of being known. And the cruelest part of this wrong conclusion is how easily you can start to believe it yourself. Because when the world reflects a story back at you long enough with enough consistency and enough authority, you begin to wonder if maybe they are right. Maybe something is off. Maybe the common denominator in every friendship that faded is you. Maybe you are too sensitive, too selective, too unwilling to meet people where they are. But here is what that conclusion gets completely backwards. Empaths do not have few friends because they are unwilling to meet people where they are. Empaths have few friends because they have spent years meeting people where they are at an enormous personal cost, and they finally learn to stop doing it without receiving anything close to the same in return. That is not closed off. That is hard-won wisdom. That is the kind of knowledge that only comes from living through enough one-sided connections to final. What recognize the pattern and recognizing a pattern is not the same as giving up on people. It is refusing to be erased by them. There is a specific kind of clarity that arrives after you stop forcing connections that were never mutual. It is not the clarity of bitterness. It is quieter than that, cleaner. It feels less like a door closing and more like a fog lifting. Suddenly, you can see your own preferences, your own rhythms, your own needs, without the static of maintaining relationships that never quite fit. You start to notice what actually restores you versus what merely distracts you. You start to notice the difference between time spent alone and time spent lonely. And you realize those are two completely different experiences that the world has been collapsing into. One word, your entire life, time spent alone for an empath is not empty. It is the opposite of empty. It is where you process everything you absorbed during your last social interaction. It is where you finally get to exist at your own frequency without adjusting, without managing, without being responsible for anyone else's emotional weather. It is not a consolation prize for failed connection. It is a genuine need as real and as legitimate as the need for water or sleep. And treating it as something lesser, treating it as evidence of a problem is like telling someone their need for rest is a character flaw. The empaths who finally understand this stop apologizing for the size of their circle. Not because they stop caring about connection, but because they finally understand that the depth of a connection is not determined by how many of them you have. And one relationship where you are fully seen, fully known, fully met, without performance, without editing, without shrinking, is worth more than 100 relationships built on the polished, carefully managed version of yourself that you send out into the world so other people feel comfortable. That is the shift. And once it happens, everything that came before it starts to make a different kind of sense. There is a question that sits at the center of every empath's social history, usually unasked, almost always unfelt at a conscious level, but present in every friendship that faded, every gathering that drained them, every relationship that ended, not with a fight, but with a slow and quiet drift. The question is not, why do I have so few friends? That is the surface question. The question underneath it, the one that actually carries weight, is this: why does being known feel so rare when I am someone who works so hard to know others? That gap between how deeply you see people and how rarely people see you with the same depth is the central wound of the empath's social experience. And until it is named clearly and honestly, it will keep being misread as a personal failing rather than what it actually is: a structural mismatch between how you experience connection and how most of the world is built to offer it. Connection for most people happens on a horizontal plane. It is built through shared activities, shared time, shared history. You go to the same school, you work in the same office, you grow up in the same neighborhood. And over time, through proximity and repetition, something that functions as closeness develops. It is real in its way. It serves a purpose. It gives people a sense of belonging, a social identity, a network of familiar faces. But it is built primarily on the outside, on what you do together, where you go together, what you have in common on the surface. And for many people, that is enough. For many people, that horizontal connection is what friendship means, what it feels like, what it is supposed to be. For an empath, horizontal connection is not enough. It never was. Even as a child, before you had the language for it, you were not satisfied by proximity alone. You wanted to know what people actually thought when they were not performing. You wanted the conversation that happened after the polished version ended. You wanted to sit with someone in their uncertainty, their doubt, their unresolved questions, not because you were drawn to pain, but because that was where you felt the realness of another person. That was where connection stopped being a social transaction and started being something genuine. You were always reaching for a vertical kind of connection, one that went down instead of across into depth instead of across surface. And the world is not built for vertical connection. The world is built for horizontal connection. It's social scripts, it's small talk, it's gatherings and group chats and social media feeds. All of it is optimized for breadth, not depth, for managing impressions, not revealing truths, for staying comfortable, not getting real. And every time you tried to go deeper in a space that was designed to stay shallow, you hit the same invisible wall. People would pull back, change the subject, laugh it off, snorts, redirect towards something safer. And you would feel that redirect in your body like a small closing door. And you would smile and adjust and file away another data point about this particular person's capacity for depth. And quietly, without making a scene, you would move them to a different category in your internal understanding of your world. This is not coldness. This is not judgment. This is an empath learning through years of gathered evidence who can hold real weight and who cannot. Who can sit with an honest question and who needs to deflect it. Who shows up the same in the dark as they do in the light and who only exists in the comfortable middle. You are not ranking people. You are reading them, and what you have read over and over and over again is that genuine vertical connection is rare. Not because people are bad, but because depth requires a kind of courage and self-awareness that most people have never been asked to develop. So what happens to an empath who keeps reaching for depth in a world that keeps offering surface? One of two things. Either they exhaust themselves performing horizontal connection, showing up, fitting in, saying the right things, maintaining relationships that feel like wearing shoes 2 sizes too small, or they stop, they pull back. They narrow the circle to the people who have actually shown them they can go deep, and they let the rest quietly fall away. And from the outside, that second choice looks like withdrawal. It looks like social failure. It looks like someone who gave up, or someone who never really tried, or someone who thinks they are better than everyone else and cannot be bothered. From the inside, it feels like finally being able to breathe. That is the contrast that almost never gets acknowledged in any conversation about empaths and friendship. The contrast between how the choice looks and how it feels. Because if you only look at it from the outside, the empath with few friends appears to be missing something. Appears to be smaller, less connected, less whole. But if you step inside the experience, if you actually inhabit what it feels like to stop maintaining connections that were costing you pieces of yourself, the picture is completely different. There is relief, there is space, there is a quality of internal quiet that is almost impossible to describe to someone who has never felt the weight of a social life that did not fit. And in that space, something important starts to happen. The empath begins to hear themselves again. Not the edited version, not the managed, adjusted, socially calibrated version that they send out into the world to make other people comfortable. The actual version, the one with opinions that are too direct, observations that are too precise, feelings that run too deep for most conversations to hold, the one that has been waiting patiently in the background while the performance version handled all the social obligations. And when that actual version gets room to exist, something shifts in the empath's relationship with themselves that is more nourishing than most of their external relationships ever were. This is the truth that sits at the heart of the empath's small circle. And it is a truth that the world almost never gives them permission to say out loud. Being alone with yourself when you are someone who actually knows themselves is not a lesser experience than being surrounded by people who do not. It is a different experience, a quieter one. One that requires you to be comfortable with silence, with your own thoughts, with the absence of distraction, but it is not a worse one. And for the empath, it is often where the most important things happen, not the most visible things. Not the things that translate well into social media posts or dinner party stories. The important things, the things you figure out about who you are and what you actually want and what you are genuinely unwilling to compromise on. The clarity that only arrives when the noise drops below a certain threshold and you can finally hear the signal underneath. The empath small circle is not a consolation prize for someone who could not build something bigger. It is the chosen environment of someone who finally understood the difference between noise and signal and made a deliberate decision about which one they were going to spend their life oriented toward. That decision has a cost. There are empty weekends. There are moments when a joke lands in your head. and there is no one nearby to share it with. There are days when the quiet tips from peaceful into something that carries more weight, and you sit with that weight honestly, because you are someone who has always sat with things honestly, and you do not dress it up as something it is not, but you also do not let that weight become the entire story, because the entire story is bigger than the hard moments. The entire story includes the depth of the connections you do have. The ones where you do not have to translate yourself, where you can say the true thing without watching the other person's face for signs that it was too much. Where silence is comfortable and honesty is safe, and you leave feeling more like yourself than you did when you arrived. One of those connections is worth more than you have been told. By every social metric the world uses to measure a well-lived life, you are supposed to want more. More names in your phone, more plans on your calendar, more people who know your name. But the metrics are wrong, or rather they are measuring the wrong thing. They are measuring quantity when the only thing that actually matters, the only thing that actually feeds a human being at the level that sustains them, is quality. And quality at the depth and empathy requires is so rare that finding even one person who can meet you there is a genuine achievement, not a consolation. An achievement there is a particular kind of strength that does not announce itself. It does not arrive with confidence that fills a room or charisma that pulls people in from across a crowd. It does not show up in the size of your social circle or the frequency of your weekend plans or the volume of notifications on your phone. It is quieter than all of that, more internal, more durable. It is the kind of strength that gets built slowly in private through years of choosing honesty over performance, DEP over breath, solitude over the wrong kind of company. It is the strength of someone who has learned through direct and often painful experience exactly who they are, what they need, and what they absolutely refuse to pretend away for the comfort of people who were never going to truly see them anyway. That strength does not always look like strength from the outside. From the outside, it can look like isolation, like difficulty, like someone who could not make it work socially and eventually stopped trying. But that reading is not just wrong. It is the exact opposite of the truth. The truth is that the empath with few friends has done something that the majority of people spend their entire lives avoiding. They have sat with themselves honestly. Not the curated version, not the version that photographs well or earns approval, but the full unedited version with all of its contradictions, its sensitivities, its intensities, its needs that do not fit neatly into what the world has decided a person is supposed to require. They have looked at that full version, and instead of flinching, instead of immediately reaching for distraction or company or any external thing to drown out the discomfort of genuine self-knowledge, they have chosen to stay to be present with themselves in a way that is, if you think about it clearly, one of the rarest forms of courage available to a human being. Most people are frightened of their own interior. Not consciously, not in a way they would admit over dinner, but watch how quickly the average person reaches for their phone the moment silence arrives. Watch how full their schedule needs to be before they feel okay. Watch how much of their identity is constructed from external feedback, from what other people think of them, how other people respond to them, whether other people include them. The average person has outsourced enter-mouse portions of their sense of self to the social world around them. Which means when that social world shifts, when friendships fade, when relationships end, when the group moves on, they lose access to pieces of themselves they did not know they had handed over. The empath with few friends does not have this problem, not because they are immune to loneliness and not because they do not crave connection. They do it at depth most people will never understand. But because they have been building something in the quiet that most people never build, a relationship with their own interior that is stable, honest, and not dependent on external validation to hold its shape. They know what they think before someone else confirms it. They know what they feel before it gets named by someone else's reaction. They know what they value, what they cannot compromise, what lights them up, and what quietly extinguishes them, not because they read it in a book or heard it in a conversation, but because they have had enough silence to actually listen to themselves. And that kind of self-knowledge is a form of wealth that does not show up on any social ledger, but sustains a person through things that social popularity simply cannot. Here is something worth sitting with. The most important relationship of your entire life is not the one you will find on the outside. It is not the perfect friendship, the deep partnership, The rare person who finally sees you the way you have always wanted to be seen. Those things matter. They are real, and they are worth waiting for, and they are worth protecting when they arrive. But the most important relationship of your life is the one you have with yourself. And the empath with few friends, almost always without intending to, has invested more deeply in that relationship than most people ever will. Not because they chose self-improvement or committee D to a spiritual practice or followed a system, but simply because the alternative filling the space with people who did not fit eventually stopped being bearable. And in clearing that space, they created the conditions for something rare to grow, where a self that is actually known, not performed, not managed, not adjusted to fit the shape of whoever is in the room. Known by the one person who will be with them every single moment of every single day for the rest of their life. That is not a small thing. That is not a consolation prize for someone who could not make the social thing work. That is the foundation that everything else has to be built on. And most people are trying to build their entire lives on a foundation they have never once stopped to examine. You have examined yours slowly, sometimes painfully, often in the kind of quiet that the world mistakes for emptiness. But you have examined it. And what you have found there, whatever complicated, contradictory, intensely felt truth lives at the center of who you are, that is yours in a way that nothing the external world gives you ever fully can be. Now here is where this needs to go. Honest in a direction most content like this carefully avoids. Having few friends as an empath is not purely a strength. It is not a badge. It is not evidence of superiority or spiritual advancement or a more enlightened relationship with solitude. It is also sometimes genuinely hard. There are costs that are real and worth naming without dressing them up. There are moments of acute loneliness that hit differently than the comfortable solitude. Moments when something happens, something beautiful or something devastating. And the list of people you can call with it is so short that the shortness itself becomes part of the pain. There are seasons of life where the quiet tips from clarifying into something that has more weighing hate to it, where you wonder not with shame but with genuine uncertainty whether the bar you have set for connection is a reflection of your values or a wall you built so well that even the right people cannot find the door. That question deserves honesty because the difference between discernment and self-protection dressed as discernment is not always obvious from the inside. Discernment stays open. It has standards, yes, high ones, ones that most people will not meet, but it remains genuinely available to the people who do meet them. It does not pre-reject before the evidence is in. It does not decide in advance that depth is too risky, that being seen is too dangerous, that the cost of trying one more time outweighs the possibility of finding what it has always been looking for. Self-protection, wearing discernment's closed, does all of those things. And it is worth asking yourself honestly and without judgment which one is running the show, not to dismantle your boundaries, not to force yourself back into connections that genuinely do not fit, but to make sure that the door is actually open for the ones who could. Because here's what the empath with few friends sometimes forgets in the long stretches of quiet. Connection at the depth you require does exist. It is not a fantasy. It is not something you invented to console yourself for what you have not found. There are other people living at that register. Other people who process at the same depth, who feel the same asymmetry in shallow relationships, who have the same uncompromising need for honesty over performance. They are rare. Yes, you will not find them in every room or every season of your life, but they exist. And the version of you that has spent years in the quiet knowing yourself, refusing to pretend, staying honest in the absence of external validation. That version of you is exactly the person capable of recognizing them when they arrive, because you know what real feels like. You have held out long enough to remember, and that is not nothing. That is everything. So here is where this lands. Not with a resolution, because real things do not resolve cleanly, but with a reframe that is worth carrying. The small circle is not a symptom. The quiet is not a wound. The selectiveness is not a flaw in your design. They are evidence of something that most people sacrifice without realizing it. The refusal to disappear into a version of your life that does not actually fit you. That refusal has a cost. You know the cost. You have paid it in empty weekends and unanswered questions and the particular ache of feeling like the world is speaking a language that is almost but not quite yours. But it has also built something solid, something that belongs to you in a way that 100 surface-level friendships never could. It has built a self that knows itself, and a self that knows itself can find its people. Not by lowering the standard, not by pretending the depth does not matter, but by staying present, staying honest, and trusting that what is rare is not impossible, just worth waiting for. You are not broken. You are not behind. You are not someone who failed at the social game everyone else seems to be winning. You are someone who refused to play a game that was never built for the way you experience the world. And that refusal, quiet, unannounced, sometimes lonely, always honest, is one of the most important things about you. Do not let anyone, including yourself, convince you it is.